Most people think debt is only a number, a balance, a rate, a due date, a monthly obligation. I do not think debt is that small. Debt reaches much further than a statement. It reaches into your mornings, it reaches into your sleep, it reaches into the way you look at every paycheck before it even arrives, it reaches into your willingness to say yes to work you do not want. Because too much of your future has already been promised away to your past. That is what most people miss. They think debt is just math. It is not just math. It is math plus emotion, math plus pressure, math plus time already sold. And once a person understands that, debt freedom stops being some cute financial milestone. It becomes something much larger. It becomes a way of buying back your own life. The reference document you gave me understands this at a very human level. It begins by asking the reader to define a real why for becoming debt-free, not just a vague wish. It talks about peace of mind, better sleep, and the desire to stop starting every month already behind because money is owed to old decisions. It also connects debt freedom to future goals such as homeownership and stronger credit. That is exactly right. Debt is never only about debt. It is about what debt prevents you from doing next. Faithful-site, Fay turn 23, file 0 Fay, that is where I would begin. Not with a spreadsheet, not with a debt strategy, not with a calculator. I would begin with a question, why must this debt die? Not why would it be nice? Why must it die? Because if the answer is weak, your discipline will be weak. If the answer is a polite little sentence you repeat because it sounds responsible, that sentence will not help you and the process becomes slow, repetitive, lonely, and inconvenient. A person paying off debt is almost always trading present comfort for future peace. That is a hard trade if the future peace is vague. That is a much easier trade when the future peace becomes vivid. So I would ask, do you want to sleep without that monthly dread? Do you want to stop seeing every raise disappear into balances you no longer even feel emotionally connected to? Do you want to stop carrying around the private embarrassment of knowing that your life is partly being financed backward? Do you want to save for a home, a family, a business, or a future without also carrying old consumer decisions on your back? Do you want to stop being owned by minimum payments? Those are real reasons, and real reasons matter. The source file is very smart to insist on this first. It says the author needed a reason to get through the process, and that peace of mind and a future home were the two clearest reasons. That is not fluff. Motivation is fuel. If the why is strong, a person can endure the temporary inconvenience of becoming debt-free. If the why is weak, every dinner invitation, shopping impulse, and convenience purchase starts sounding more reasonable than the goal. Fay file site Fay turn 23, file 0 Fay. Now, once the why is real, the next step is usually the part people delay the longest. Look directly. This is the step most people fear for the same reason. They fear all unwanted truth. They imagine clarity will hurt more than ambiguity. Usually the opposite is true. Ambiguity is what keeps the stress alive all day. Clarity may hurt in the moment, but at least it gives the pain edges that matters. A problem with edges can be worked on. A problem with no edges just follows you around like weather. The source material uses a very vivid analogy here, comparing debt avoidance to ignoring a suspicious mole because you are afraid of what the doctor might say. That is exactly how many people behave with debt. They do not look closely, not because looking is useless, but because looking makes it real. The mistake, of course, is that not looking does not make the problem smaller. It only makes it more powerful, because you cannot plan around what you refuse to name. Fay file site Fay turn 23, file 0. Fay, I have always believed one of the great adult skills is the willingness to sit down with unpleasant numbers and remain seated. No flinching, no pretending, no storytelling, just the truth. This card, that loan, this line of credit, that car note, this student debt. That personal balance you promised yourself you would deal with next quarter and then did not. Every debt has to come out of hiding type, balance, interest rate, minimum payment, due date. That is the right beginning. The source text says exactly this. Gather the statements, organize the debts, and write them down so you can see them all in one place. This matters because once debt is visible, it stops being one giant unnamed pressure and starts becoming a list of specific obligations that can be ordered and attacked. That is a huge psychological shift. File a site, turn 23, file 0, most people think seeing the whole list will make them feel worse. Sometimes it does for an hour, but then something else happens. The fog starts to break. The debt is no longer one huge emotional cloud. It becomes several separate problems. A card, a loan, a line, a balance, and separate problems can be ranked, separate problems can be fought. That is where intelligence begins. Now, once the list is on the table, the next question is how to attack it. And here we run into an old tension in personal finance: math versus motivation. The source file explains the two common methods. The avalanche method attacks the highest interest rate first. The snowball method attacks the smallest balance first. The avalanche is elegant. The snowball is energizing. I respect both. But if you force me to choose what matters more for most people, I choose momentum. Not because math is irrelevant, because most people do not quit debt plans due to theoretical inefficiency. They quit because the path stops feeling alive. The source material is very open about preferring the snowball method for this reason. It says quick wins create a dopamine hit and help build momentum, and it uses the image of a snowball rolling downhill, getting bigger and harder to stop as each balance disappears, and it's freed. A payment gets added to the next target. That is psychologically intelligent. File a site, turn 23, file 0, I have enormous respect for any system that understands human nature. The best debt plan on paper is worthless if it does not survive actual life. So yes, if you are highly analytical and deeply motivated by saving every last bit of interest, Avalanche may suit you, but if you need visible proof that your effort is working, then Snowball may be better. In the real world, a very good method you can sustain beats a perfect method you abandon. That is one of the most useful truths in finance. Before I start throwing large amounts at debt, though, I want one more thing in place: a small shield. The source text says to make sure you have at least $1,000 in an emergency fund before aggressively tackling debt. I think that is exactly right, because if life hits you with a tire, a bill, a repair, or a medical cost, and you have nothing between that event and your credit card, then the same debt you are trying to kill starts growing again the moment life becomes inconvenient. File site turn 23, file 0 that is not a side note, that is structural. A debt payoff plan that cannot survive ordinary life is not a plan. It is a mood, and moods lose. Life does not need to become dramatic to break a fragile debt strategy. It just needs to be life. Cars break, kids need things. Bodies get sick, hours get cut, fees appear. If each of those events sends you back to fresh borrowing, then you are not really moving forward, you are rotating in place. So yes, I want debt dead. But I also want the plan protected from ordinary chaos. That is why the small emergency shield matters. Now let us talk about the next truth people avoid. Debt does not die because you want it gone. Debt dies because you create surplus. This is where many plans become emotional theater instead of finance. A person says he is serious, but he does not know what his take home pay is. He says he wants to attack debt, but he does not know what his real expenses were last month. He says he is ready, but he has never measured what is actually left after his life runs for 30 days. That is not readiness. That is hope-wearing responsible language. The source material gets this exactly right. It says to calculate net monthly income, look at the full most recent month, add up all the spending, and determine the true savings amount or savings rate. Not gross income, not rough guesses. Net income after taxes and a real month of data. That is how you find the money that can actually be assigned to debt. File a site, turn 23, file 0, I care a lot about that word. Assigned, a dollar that is not assigned will get captured by habit. That is why many people say they are trying to pay off debt while their behavior says they are merely thinking about debt a lot. Thinking is not assignment. Assignment is when the month already knows where the surplus is going before temptation gets a vote. And to do that, you need to know your expenses, honestly. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, subscriptions, shopping, eating out, every category, every leak. every pattern you prefer to describe vaguely because the truth would be less flattering. The source file even walks the viewer through categorizing expenses and comparing budgeted amounts to actual spending. That is more than a tutorial exercise. It is the moment where the person stops being loosely concerned and becomes operationally aware. Awareness is not passive. Awareness changes behavior. Fay file site Fay turn 23 file 0 Fay, and once the spending is real, a hard truth often shows up. The current lifestyle and the desire to become debt-free cannot coexist at the same speed. That is where maturity enters. The source material refuses to sugarcoat this, and I respect that. It says directly that you cannot maintain your current lifestyle while aggressively trying to pay off debt. That means saying no to dinner plans, no to shopping, no to vacations, no to luxury purchases, and redirecting the money instead. That is honest. Fay file site Fay turn 23 file 0 Fay. I would say it this way. If your life is currently financed partly by debt, then some of the lifestyle you are calling normal is not actually affordable. That is not an insult. It is arithmetic. The correction may be uncomfortable, but it is not cruel. It is temporary discipline in exchange for permanent relief. That is a rational trade, a person meal. Prepping instead of eating out while he kills debt is not depriving himself without purpose. He is turning present convenience into future breathing room. A person skipping the vacation to finish off a credit card is not missing life. He is refusing to keep paying for old pleasures with new labor. A person saying no to a shopping impulse is not shrinking his life. He is preventing the past from building the future again. This is the kind of temporary compression that creates permanent expansion later. Most people are not willing to think that way. That is why they stay in debt longer than they need to. Now here is the good part. Once the budget is honest and the surplus is real, debt repayment stops being an emotional aspiration and becomes a machine. Minimum payments go to every balance except the current target. Everything extra goes to the target, then one balance dies. Its minimum payment is freed. That freed payment rolls into the next balance. Then that one dies. Then the next one takes an even larger hit. This is the snowball, and I think it is beautiful precisely because it turns progress into visible force. The source text S example shows this clearly. Once one debt is gone, the amount formerly used there no longer disappears. It becomes ammunition for the next balance. That is how people who once felt stuck begin to feel dangerous to their debt. Fay Felicite Fay turn 23 file 0 Fay at the beginning. The extra payment may look small. Maybe it is $200, maybe $300, maybe less. People get discouraged because they want the first swing to look dramatic. That is childish thinking. The first swing does not need to look dramatic. It needs to happen, then it needs to happen again. Then again, that is how structures fall, one disciplined month after another, and yes, it may take a while. The source text is very honest that becoming debt-free can take years. I like that honesty because when people assume it should take a few months, they become discouraged by reality. But if they understand from the beginning that this is a season, a campaign, a temporary narrowing of life for a future widening, then the timeline becomes easier to bear. Fay file site Fay turn 23 file 0 Fay temporary is the key word. A great many people fail because they think the current sacrifice is their new permanent identity. It is not. It is a season. A person who understands that can say no more calmly, no to the extra spending, no to the lifestyle creep, no to the social pressure, no to the emotional purchases, because the no is not forever. It is just until the debt dies. And then another important point, keep the goal visible. The source text is very good here too. It says out of sight is out of mind and suggests visual reminders like sticky notes, phone backgrounds, or notes on the fridge, plus regular revisiting of the reason behind the goal. That may sound simplistic, but it is powerful. If the debt-free future is invisible, present comfort will usually win. If the debt-free future is visible, behavior starts quietly bending toward it. Fay file site Fay turn 23 file 0 Fay. This is no different from health. The file uses a daily way, in example, and I think that is smart. The scale does not make you healthier by magic. It changes behavior because it keeps the feedback loop alive. Debt tracking works the same way. A visible goal changes decisions before those decisions harden into another bad month. Faithfulicite Fayturn 23 file 0 Fay. So if I were reducing the whole debt journey into a handful of principles, I would say it like this. First, make the reason emotional enough to matter. Second, force the whole truth into the light. Third, protect the plan with a small emergency shield. Fourth, choose a method that you can actually sustain. Fifth, know your real surplus. Sixth, compress the lifestyle hard enough that debt can feel the pressure. Seventh, let each win strengthen the next attack. Eighth, keep the goal visible until discipline becomes more natural than drift. That is the whole path. And if you stay on it, something remarkable happens. At first, you think you are only paying off debt later. You realize you are learning how to live differently. You are learning how to assign money, how to delay comfort, how to tell yourself the truth, how to stop letting yesterday dominate tomorrow, how to create peace with discipline, instead of hoping peace will somehow appear first. That is a much larger victory than a zero balance. The zero balance matters, of course it does. But what matters just as much is who you become on the way there. A person who learns to face the debt, cut the waste, build the surplus, and keep going through the boring middle of the process has learned something very powerful. He has learned that temporary discomfort can buy permanent freedom. He has learned that clarity beats avoidance. He has learned that small repeated actions can dismantle something that once felt overwhelming. And he has learned that his future does not need to stay chained to his past. That, in the end, is why I think the debt journey matters so much. Not because being debt-free sounds responsible, because being debt-free feels like getting your life back.